Hi guys. Today's gonna be part 2 of the childhood trauma video that I did with Dr. Kathomi. But before we get into all that, look, my edges are done. Like, have you ever had those days when you're so successful at adulting? I feel like my name should be Bokuisha with all these edges. So, before you watch part 2 of the childhood trauma video, I wanted to say something that I forgot to mention in the part 1, which is I'm not really able to do any deep dive in the comment section because of the nature of these topics. They're extremely heavy topics. You would need to discuss them in the safety of a therapeutic relationship, because only a therapist can identify when you're getting re-traumatized, when something might affect you now that you think is not affecting you, all those intricate details that I don't know. And so I've left Dr. Kathomi's details in the description box. She can provide her services remotely. So wherever in the world you are, you can access her services and get any and unpack anything you might want to unpack. But please don't think that if I don't respond in my DMs or in the comment section about this topic that I'm ignoring you. It's just that I don't have the ability to do a deep dive about these really heavy topics, okay? So just be aware of that, and let's get into part 2 of the childhood trauma with Dr. Kathomi. Thanks for watching. If this resonates with you, I would absolutely welcome comments of a general kind. I discuss my personal experiences in the video. I would love to hear your personal experiences, but I can only respond as it relates to myself, or help you relate with me in the sense of comparing personal experiences. I can't take a deep dive into the actual issues, but I would love to hear the things that you guys have been giving, the things that you guys have been telling me. I've received amazing feedback. Thank you so much to everyone who's engaged with part 1. It's really eye-opening for me as well when I hear other people's experiences. I think it just confirms what I already know, which is that we're all the same. We're in different bodies, we're in different skin, colors of skin or whatever, but we're all the same in the sense that we're all looking for the same thing at the end of the day. So let's get into part 2. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on next part of the childhood trauma with Dr. Kathomi. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, do all that stuff. How does this trauma manifest in our day-to-day lives as adults? Because I think the only time I started thinking about my life in depth was after high school, when I went to Australia for university. And now I'm away from my normal environment. I'm not in Kenya, I'm not with my parents, I'm not with my siblings. I'm in a completely different alien country. And I have these haunting, thoughts or feelings or behaviors, self-destructive thoughts, self-destructive behaviors. I remember
self-sabotaging.
I had a complete lack of confidence. I didn't think I was worthy. I didn't think I was beautiful. I didn't think I was smart. These things were all just used to play in my mind. And I can see now in hindsight how they contributed to the decisions I made, say with the partners that I chose, or with the friends that I chose, or even with how I conducted myself. I used to just be like, oh, don't laugh too loudly, you're too loud, or you'll offend others if you laugh too loudly, and just these things. And so
and for you, where did the narrative of shrinking yourself like that come from? Were you able to figure out what the reasons
I was, because in an African household, you can't speak up above your parents. I've always been an inquisitive child. Since I was a child, I've always asked my parents, why am I in the kitchen when my brothers are outside playing? I've always been that inquisitive child. And I don't know if my parents knew what to do with all my questions. The focus was on academics, be number 1 in school. Anything else is irrelevant. If you're not,
we don't care about your values, your personality. Just bring us a good report.
Who cares? Were you number 1? So I tied it back to that of being told, oh, you're not. I remember I used to be a tomboy, severely like a tomboy, and I have a memory of my maternal grandmother, who I have no other memory of her because she passed away when I was young. But I was sitting in front of her and my legs were wide, and she threw a piece of firewood between my legs and told me, sit properly. I remember that distinctly because I remember thinking, I don't know anything else about my grandma, but I remember her telling me, and not just her, even my mom used to tell me, to try and be more like a lady and, do these things. But I naturally, I don't know if it was in rebellion to what I was being told, but all I wanted to be was a tomboy. I used to dress like a boy. I used to, want to do boy things.
And imagine the pain of not being able to self-express as a kid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's where I learned, specifically my own personal story. That's how I learned to suppress my feelings. And so I see it even now when I'm struggling with something and I'm not able to express it because I'm just like, oh, I don't want to be a bother, or I don't want to disturb people, or I don't want people to be tired of me. Things like that. And I'm just like, no, this is not right. It's actually...
Up to now, you're still trying to sit properly.
Yeah! Yes! Up to now, I am still trying to sit. Oh my God, that's profound.
Because if you don't sit properly, fire will be thrown to you. Whatever kind of pain will be thrown at you.
Oh my God.
You don't. It's a very strong imprint.
Oh wow.
And it seems like it's an imprint that has been a reference point for you, actually.
Yeah, it has. So do you have examples of how this also manifests in other people's lives? Maybe you can even give your own example of your own life or something else of maybe other people you've spoken to.
Well, the best way to see how much you have the patterns in your life is actually to observe and to witness your triggers in action. So triggers, I know we casually use that word a lot now. Oh, I'm triggered, But a trigger is actually a pathway to a trauma imprint, right? Because it kind of pushes through the body to the surface, because the trauma might be so imprinted, so cellularly imprinted within us, right? Generational stuff that we pick up from our parents. But it still needs to express, So the best way to know your patterns is to really observe the things that trigger you.
So the things that either make you very upset or very sad or
very sad, they make you want to shrink, they make you feel a certain kind of way, they make you feel like you're not good enough, they make you want to recoil, they make you feel shame, they make you feel guilt, or things like that. So it's or sometimes, so a good example for me is that I was a very criticized child, right? I grew up with very hypercritical grandparents, who are, up to now I still think they were like textbook narcissists, but can't confirm or deny. But and for me, that was my very first memories of relationships, is to have people who were never satisfied with anything that I did, right? It was ever, but why didn't you do that other thing? But you could have done it better. Yeah. Or, oh my God, this child is such a bother. So it was like an endless pit of trying to seek approval. And there was just a lot of criticism around, up to now, when I was actually thinking about this, I can actually never ever recall a single positive thing that was ever said to me by my grandparents who raised me from when I was a child to when I was about 10 or 11, I don't quite recall. I was like, I'm gonna force myself to remember the good things. I'm gonna change the perspective. And I was like,
there's nothing.
Either I've blocked it out completely or it's just not there, So that was my blueprint for relationships, And so up to now, and I've done a lot of this work, I've gone to therapy and I'm a therapist myself, so I'm very hyper aware about where, and my window of tolerance around this is actually getting really good. But as I grew up, I found myself that I couldn't really tolerate criticism.
Yeah.
Right? Because it just really transported me back to my childhood about this sense of being unloved and being not wanted, because I was born out of wedlock, and it was a big disgrace to my entire family, and there was all this shame around my birth and around my coming into the world that I absorbed.
Why you were raised by your grandparents? Is that
reason? My mom was a teenage mom, and she did a good job, and and she's lovely. But for those years, she left me in the village and went to work in the city to,
provide a life for you,
fend for herself and provide and all those things. But there was this deep sense of shame that I was brought into the world with, this sense of, oh man, should you be here?
Let's hide the shame.
And my presence just invoked my grandparents' criticism and reminded them that they were
of the mistake that your mom had made.
Yeah, and the mistakes that they had made raising my mom, because they were
like, we've failed with this one, and look how we failed because she's gotten a child.
Yeah, and here is the everyday evidence of that stuff, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they were really religious. They were leaders in the Catholic Church. So you can imagine. So I grew up, I wasn't quite able to name it, but it was this shredded in shame and, all these things.
Yeah.
And so for me, in adulthood, I started to realize that when I was criticized or someone said something wasn't good enough or whatever, it transported and regressed me back to my childhood, because this instantly meant that this person was ashamed of me, didn't want me, or, it just couldn't be, could you do this better? To me, the feedback was never just feedback. It was layered with experience.
Yes, yes, that is also something that's manifested for me, because I used to, even now, it's just that now I can recognize the negative thought and arrest it before it goes further. But criticism for me was, you're not enough. You see, you're not worthy. If other people can criticize you other than your parents, you're not worthy. You see, it's just confirmation of what you've grown up believing about yourself.
Absolutely. And this happens when you're not affirmed as a child in other ways, apart from that one thing, So if your affirmation only comes to you through schoolwork or through achievement, well, we live through life without ever achieving much. Let me just say this. A lot of people just live an ordinary, average life, and that's beautiful.
Yeah.
But think about the pain, the anguish it causes people who feel like the only way they get love is by achieving big things and achieving these things, and the way in which they have to self-betray to just kind of go and find those things and all those things. So all of us bring these patterns into adulthood, and I could see how it was manifesting for me. So often I would end up choosing partners that were very critical or borderline narcissistic. Again, can't deny or confirm, but but I felt like it was something I was familiar with. As a child, I had learned how to maneuver through my grandparents' criticism.
Yeah.
I felt like I'd worked them out, and therefore I knew which buttons to push to get them to just leave me alone. And therefore I felt like I could bring this into my adult relationships as well. I didn't even know I had a pattern until a therapist said, but babe, let's just look at this man you're going out with. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah. that really just opened another like window in my head, because I remember from very young, I remember as a teenager being like, okay, if you're going to criticize, I remember thinking, if you assume something about me that is false, I will not bother to correct you. Because I was just like, I can't be bothered to explain
Affirm
myself
yourself.
because even if I explained myself as a kid, I wasn't listened to. I felt not heard. And so why bother anyway?
There you go.
Wow.
You know, because you didn't feel like your reality and your truth was ever going to make a difference in how other people viewed you or responded to you. And therefore you're like, yeah, whatever then. You know, if my truth never ever makes a difference, what's the point of correcting the lie?
Yeah. And so how do our parents learn these methods? Because, you know, we said earlier, fine, cool, you're trying to do the best for us, but in you trying to do the best for us actually ended up causing harm, and in the sense of childhood trauma. And so I also feel, and I'm sure I'm 100% right on this, that our parents' generation is so traumatized, but because their main goal was survival, they had to survive the villages they grew up in, they had to survive the lifestyle they grew up in, so that they could in turn provide a lifestyle for us. So I feel like all this stuff was in the back of their heads. They're like, okay, cool, I have food on the table, cool, I have clothes on my back, I have a job, I'm good, I don't need to think about other things. But I actually think our parents' generation is extremely traumatized.
That's true. You are absolutely right. I think, you know, there's a wonderful book I think everybody should read called It Didn't Start With You. You know how inherited trauma works, you know, in families, you know, and as of people start coming to me for therapy, what we quickly realize is that most of our parents are just children trapped in adult bodies, right?
Yeah.
There were also children who were denied their realities. You know, there were children who were never allowed to thrive emotionally. And, you know, what sometimes make a huge difference in how we are able to respond to our emotional needs and our feelings is having emotional maturity, which is the one thing that we were never encouraged to have. You know, what do you mean emotions? What do you think we're discussing emotions? I do not know many people whose families discussed how they felt, you know?
Same. Maybe just Caucasian families. I don't know Africans who were raised being affirmed at oh, you're upset, I acknowledge you're upset.
Okay.
I don't know.
Ati, let's unpack that together.
Let's unpack that. Let's even have a cuddle. Just a guy. Anyway.
Ati, come here, baby. Let me, you know, let's kiss and make, you know, I'll kiss that part of you that is hurt and we'll make it better. Yeah. You approach your parents and immediately you can feel the pain disappearing because what you're just about to experience is worse than how you've just hurt yourself outside. You fell from a tree, you broke your vertebrae, but you better just not approach your parents.
So,
why are we laughing? Guy, this is so bad.
You don't laugh, you'll cry.
But you know, it's a form of coping that I find, you know, because even I see my mother sometimes reminiscing with her siblings about how they were raised by my grandparents, their parents. And the only way they can cope through that level of that family that they were raised in is to laugh about it now. And they go, do you remember? And they're all on the floor laughing.
Yeah.
You know, because now they have the freedom to laugh about it. As kids, they just couldn't even laugh. Laughter and joy wasn't a part of the family's discourse. Why aren't you reading? You know,
Or if you,
why are you laughing as if you've got nothing to do? So things like joy and happiness weren't just prioritized in many families.
No.
You smiling there. What's wrong?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
go to your room and study, or have you finished reading all your mathematics books? You don't have
your own room. It's go in the room that you share with your 12 other siblings, and there's no electricity, so go and get the torch that you and your siblings will share to read this book that you're meant to understand, and all share and all pass and all. So yes, I want to understand how you mentioned something about colonialism and how that has impacted our parents, and how also in turn impacted how they raised us. So let's touch a bit more.
Absolutely. So I think our parents particularly were, and maybe their parents were particularly traumatized. You know, I want us to think about the impact of invasion and colonialism in our countries. You know, think about our ancestors. They're just living their lives. They planted their stuff. They're living life. They're living life. And then someone comes and beats them, rapes their women, kills them, and says, "This is mine now."
And collects the men to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And humiliates some in front of others to inflict fear, and then force the ones that remain to go and be servants for this empire. You know, the process there, I can't even describe it shortly in this video, but I want to say it's a complete process of stripping any form of human dignity and what I call Black dignity, because some of these things were done by white colonialists, you know. So our pride as Africans, our pride as Black people, our pride in the way we dressed, we cooked, and the way we worshipped was criminalized, you know. We were told we were this and that and this and that, and there was no room and no permission to be ourselves.
Yeah.
And therefore we had to adopt an entirely new religion, an entirely new lifestyle, an entirely new language. And any connection to our former self was evidence that there was something psychopathologically wrong with us. So I want you to think about how that deep separation with yourself can harm you. So think about just how, when we were not affirmed, how much that has hurt us. Now think about our parents.
Yeah, and we're not in chains as, colonialist slaves.
We are not the people being told, now go and serve this person, now go and there's no more dignity in who you are. Like literally what we're experiencing is a very diluted form of the trauma our ancestors experienced. And you can see the impact it has. You know, a lot of people say, millennials don't know how to cope. No, we are the first generation who is actually talking about this.
We are.
And that's why everybody is just like, you guys have no resilience. It's like, no, we are the first people actually saying this is not okay, and we are not okay.
This is not okay. I'm not okay with X, Y, and Z, and I'm gonna do it my way. We're the first generation with access to information on our fingertips about mental health. We're even discussing mental health in a more liberal way than, I don't even think that term was used in our parents' generation. I don't even think it's this, maybe the word wazimu, like you're maybe in that context.
Think about the words like the village madman, you know?
Yeah.
And, just the mythologies we created around what they must have done to bring that unto themselves.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about is that these deep traumas latch onto the body. And when you experience really, really, really chronic significant trauma, what it does is that it actually changes your genetic makeup. A lot of people don't know this.
What?
Yes. It actually latches, and actually transfer it
So
genetically.
trauma.
Yeah. So that is when we have that, generational trauma, because the only way you can pass it to generations that have not experienced that trauma is genetically, because it latches into your genes and changes literally who you are and your sense of self. That is why Black people now, when George gets killed, we literally feel the pain.
We feel the pain. I felt that Black Lives Matter movement pain deep within me in the beginning of last year. I remember I felt sad. I felt extremely sad. And I asked myself, I was like, why are you sad? You're not an African American. You're not in America. You've never lived in America. I mean, it's not that I don't sympathize.
When you think about African Americans, they're Africans. They're our brothers and sisters.
Who were now...
they were taken from our land, from our space, from our continent. We feel
God, that is so profound. It's true. We weren't raised in that era of colonialism, but we're suffering the effects.
Oh, we are suffering intergenerational traumas and colonial violence and colonial histories, for sure. I mean, you've lived in Australia. Think about the intergenerational traumas around Indigenous people here. Most of them didn't get to live through that. I mean, of course, racism is ongoing and colonial violence is ongoing,
and denial of Indigenous people's history and rights, and there's a complete denial of no, we didn't invade
we didn't do this.
It wasn't a genocide.
Whereas there's actually very clear evidence that children of people who lived through this have genetically carried the trauma makeup of what their ancestors carried. So, and there's one thing that I want to distinguish between individual trauma and what we call collective trauma. Right? Okay. So there's those individual traumas where we carry through the family line, passed down. And then there's the collective trauma, which is what we were talking about, the Black Lives Matter, where you see other people who look like you just being killed for just walking to the shops, and you're like, dude, and every Black person knows why, and they can connect so deeply with the why, and we suffer together the plight of one Black person, being humiliated, being murdered, being shamed, being racially abused. We feel angry, we feel rage, because a lot of our triggers are activated within those experiences. So there's a lot to unpack, and and of course we are not African Americans, and of course we feel the different level of the triggers differently. But what I'm talking about here is the connection to the trauma, the fact that we feel we kind of know it, even though because the know in the body.
Even though we're not the ones being shot at by police, so somehow genetically we connect because it's already imprinted in us. Oh my.
Collective trauma. And that, you might remember a post I did years ago on Facebook that went semi-viral about how Kenyans are collectively traumatized as well. I mean, when we start to think about the different ways in which collective trauma works, when you think about Kenya as a country and the way that country is run, the politics, the religion, the dehumanizations, the extrajudicial killings, the poverty, children dying,
First of all, we need to cover the topic of religion, because I think the way religion is ideologized in African communities and African context is so damaging.
And used as a tool to inflict trauma on children.
Because you're going to hell. Actually, if you're bad, you're going to hell. So, all right. So if I've carried this childhood trauma genetically, it's been passed down from me, from my grandparents to my parents to me, how will it manifest in my day-to-day life? So for example, at work, what are the examples you can give of how childhood trauma can manifest at work? And I don't know. So let's assume I have no knowledge of, I haven't done any work, I haven't gone to therapy, I haven't really questioned why I do the things I do and how I respond. How will it show up in work, in workplace, for example?
So I often say work is a really good mirror for us, because it's a place where we don't have much control, right? A lot of things we're made to do things, we're asked to do things, so it mirrors a lot of our childhood experiences where we didn't have a lot of control and we were often asked to do things. And there's the figure boss who is your parent, in work, there's a figure boss who is your employer and things like that. So symbolically, it mirrors a fair bit. So let's say, for example, actually, I'll put this back to you. Give me an example of a time when you are at work and you felt really triggered by something that had happened at work.
My triggers used to come from people treating me badly. So if I had a bad boss, which my first full-time legal job is when I encountered a bad boss. I'd had bosses before. Maybe we weren't close, maybe we weren't, but they weren't mean. This particular woman, she was a woman, was extremely horrible. I remember my first day of work. I'm a graduate. I've just finished law school, and I've started this full-time job, which I was so happy about. And now I'm dealing with real cases. It's no longer just case studies. I'm dealing with real people.
Right.
I had a stack of files on my desk. She hasn't come to meet me. She hasn't come to orientate me, And so I go to her and I'm like, okay, there's this file. I went through it. I'm a bit confused. And she was like, you're the one with the law degree. Figure it out. I remember feeling so hurt. I was so hurt. And from then on, I never asked her a question. Regardless of how much I was suffering with lack of knowledge, I would research myself into oblivion before coming, because I was just like, it was such a rejection for me that I was just like, I don't want to be rejected like that again. And so I'm not coming to you ever again when I'm stuck. But she's my boss.
Yeah. But also now see how that mirrors your childhood experience, which is you were kind of never allowed to ask questions as a child. And so maybe the reason why this must have felt so deeply, personal to you is, remember that sense of, I'm not good enough, And so this woman is like, so even with your law degree, you're still not good enough. It entered into already that really tender spot for you, where you just needed to, where you already were struggling probably with imposter syndrome and not feeling like, oh God, how do I navigate this? And then someone confirms it, because it's already a wound for you. And because being a lawyer sounds like it was extremely important for your family status, because it was always about school, and being good at school.
Absolutely.
Your entire identity as a human being is just being a good lawyer, because that's what you studied in. And then at your first day of work, someone says you're not even a good lawyer because you're asking questions. And to you, that immediately regresses you to that feeling of, I'm not worthy to.
I remember feeling like I was about this big. I remember shrinking, feeling so stupid. And I even felt like, well, can I ask my colleagues, or will they also think I'm stupid? But luckily, over time, the relationship with me and my colleagues was absolutely magnificent. They were so supportive. All of us were such a great, tight-knit team. But our boss, oh my God. And she was the type where, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to encourage you or lead you, but dare you make a mistake.
I'm going to criticize you.
Dare you make a mistake. Oh my God.
And it's in that sometimes the environment we grow up with, we can't even come with a number 2 at home. No. You just have to be perfect.
Yeah.
And so when you have a boss who replicates that sense of, it's either perfection or nothing for me, it's either number 1 or nothing for me, how can you avoid not feeling small? Because nobody's perfect and nobody is going to get it right all the time.
Yeah. And Tony Robbins actually says perfection is the lowest standard because it actually doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's right.
He asks this question, which is in he has this Netflix documentary called I Am Not Your Guru. And he asks, whose love did you crave the most growing up, your mom or your dad? And then say, for example, it was your mom. And then it says, and then he asks, who did you have to be in order for you to feel loved by your mom? And most people's answer is, I had to be perfect. And he's like, so what would happen if you're not perfect? And this person would say, oh, I would be punished, or I would be, some other form of hardship would fall before me. And he would say, well, this is how you learn how to navigate your adult relationships. When something is difficult, you'll be like, oh, I'm not going to do it anyway, because when I face a difficulty, this is what I experienced as a child.
Yeah. Or if it's not going to be absolutely perfect, I'm not going to attempt it. And this is, I see this with a number of my clients who go, I have to make sure before I apply for that promotion, I have to be absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
And I said, and would a man be thinking about that as well? They just have to meet the bare minimum on that, job criteria, and a lot of women who've been criticized to be perfect, they just have to make sure they're not only qualified for that role, they're over and beyond qualified. So nobody can say, this isn't a perfect fit for you, and things like that. So of course you can see how on your first day of work, there is the reason why it cut you so deeply, because it's true. You're the one with a law degree. Can you figure it out? It can be a matter of fact, just like that. It doesn't need to be a rejection.
Yeah, because it ruined my day. Honestly, it ruined my day.
That's right, because you put a meaning to that sentence. And every information we receive is essentially meaningless until we put a narrative around it. So you could essentially have said, you're right, I have a law degree and I'll figure it out. It could just be as matter of fact as that.
Yeah.
But because there was a meaning attached to that sentence,
other trauma, childhood trauma,
yes,
I've now transferred it into work.
You're like, this now means rejection. This now means not good enough. This means this. You had to be the person who did that transposing of your narrative to that statement, which was horrible. But the process of transposing a narrative onto that statement was you. She didn't know your trauma background. She didn't know what you're coming with. So that second part, apart from her being horrible and saying something mean, that second part
is all me.
Was you doing that work, unconsciously transporting a narrative from childhood and going, this is what this sentence and statement now means. And this is what it says about me. And it happens in split seconds, right? So, and you can literally feel your body do it. Because there is a physical reaction. You can feel as the narrative is coming from the under you.
For me, trauma comes in my chest and in my throat. I feel unable to speak, and I feel like my chest is doing this, like I can't breathe. And so I usually just stop breathing, and I feel like I can't speak. And so that's, for me, trauma comes in the form of silence. If I'm completely silent, just know something is wrong, because that is how it shows up for me. And that's how I went on the rest of the day. I went back to my office. I felt this, like the chest tightening, slowly coming, okay. But I didn't even want to interact with anyone else that day, because I was just like, I feel so small.
Yeah, absolutely. Because your body is now bringing up the trauma. And all those physical manifestations you're feeling in the body, the breathing, the chest tightening, your sweaty palms, that's the body unearthing whatever trauma is sitting inside of you and literally transposing it into this statement. And the more you transpose it, the more it affects you. So it's like a cyclical pattern. So as you do the work, is actually being able to say, being able to stop that before the narrative starts gaining trajectory. Before you start going into 100 Ks an hour, you stop when you're at 10. You're like, okay, then I'm about to do a sprint here. You know,
a sprint
is about to do. I'm just about to do a Lamborghini start on my, on my Vitz.
Yeah.
You know, the start is so dramatic, and you can just say, right. But that is so hard when literally you don't have the tools and have never been taught to actually self-regulate.
Yeah.
So your body literally goes from 0 to 100 within a split second. Emotionally, you've been regressed straight away into being a child who couldn't speak, a child who couldn't ask questions, and a child who was constantly punished by their parents for asking questions. Shush, go away, you're a bother. That narrative starts to inform then how you hear that statement. So
subscribe.